The Galactic Empire had seen countless worlds fall under its iron grip. When they turned their gaze to Earth, it was not with awe or admiration but with cold calculation. Humanity, though technologically behind, had a reputation for being dangerously unpredictable. The Empire's analysts called it the wild card factor, a term born from centuries of encounters with species that seemed docile until cornered. Earth was no exception. Refusing to bow to imperial rule, humanity declared its independence with a defiant resolve that bordered on arrogance. The Empire responded as it always did, with precision and force. Their weapon of choice this time was the Renshkai, assassins of legend and dread. Unlike the brute force of orbital bombardments, or the overwhelming presence of imperial fleets, the Renshkai specialized in surgical strikes. Entire planetary governments had collapsed under their silent knives, their leaders assassinated, infrastructure sabotaged, and populations driven to submission through fear. The Renshkai were masters of infiltration, blending seamlessly into any society. They relied on shape-shifting technology that allowed them to assume the appearance of their prey, enhanced by psionic abilities that let them manipulate the weak-willed. They had taken down civilizations far more advanced than Earth without needing to fire a single shot. For the Empire, sending them to Earth was less about war and more about delivering a lesson. Resistance was futile. When the first Renshkai teams arrived, they did so unnoticed. Their ships were cloaked, their movements silent. Within days, key human leaders began disappearing. CEOs of defense contractors, heads of state, brilliant scientists, all found dead in secure locations. These assassinations were not random acts of violence but carefully orchestrated blows to humanity's ability to coordinate its defenses. The loss of military strategists and technological pioneers left Earth scrambling. The assassins also struck at symbols of human resilience. A global broadcast from one of Earth's most beloved leaders was interrupted when the Renshkai infiltrated their location. Before millions of horrified viewers, the leader collapsed mid-sentence, the light in their eyes extinguished. The message was clear: humanity was vulnerable, and no one was safe. Panic spread like wildfire. Earth's governments, though fractured by borders and politics, had long maintained an unspoken agreement when it came to alien threats. Unity was survival. But even the most advanced human military technology was no match for an enemy that could vanish into the crowd. Surveillance systems failed to detect the assassins' movements. Counterintelligence operations fell apart before they even began. Humanity's attempts to fight back only seemed to highlight its own inadequacy. It wasn't long before the Renshkai escalated their efforts, targeting humanity's communication networks. Blackouts rippled across continents. Satellites that once connected billions were rendered useless, severing the lifelines of modern society. Without reliable communication, chaos ensued. Cities became isolated fortresses, distrust festering among their inhabitants. For the Renshkai, this was a familiar pattern: disorient, destabilize, destroy. In the midst of this growing despair, cryptic messages began appearing on the remaining functional networks. They bore the insignia of the Galactic Empire and delivered an ultimatum. Surrender and become subjects of the Empire, the messages read, or face total annihilation. For many, the choice seemed inevitable. Earth had been caught off guard, and the might of the Empire loomed over them like an unrelenting storm. Yet, amidst the fear and confusion, there was a silent resistance brewing. High-ranking officials convened in a secret underground facility, one of the last secure locations untouched by the Renshkai. These individuals, though aware of their vulnerability, carried an ace hidden even from most of humanity. One official, speaking in a hushed tone that carried both reverence and dread, proposed the unthinkable. "It's time to activate Project Boogeyman," they said. The room fell silent. Some nodded grimly, while others hesitated, their expressions betraying uncertainty. The Boogeyman was not a myth, but few in the room knew the full extent of the program's scope. "Are we sure?" another official asked, their voice trembling. "We don't even know what they'll do once they're unleashed." The first official locked eyes with them, their resolve unshaken. "Do we have a choice?" The discussion ended with reluctant agreement. Humanity had always relied on its brightest and bravest, but this time, survival demanded something more, a force that operated outside conventional morality, a being whose very existence was kept from the public for fear of its implications. As the final authorization was given, the group dispersed, each one silently grappling with the knowledge of what they had just set in motion. Far from the chaos above, in a facility buried deeper than any radar could detect, a solitary figure prepared. For years, they had waited for this moment, their skills honed in isolation, their identity erased from records. The Wrenchkai thought they had encountered every kind of prey, but they had yet to meet the one entity that would not merely resist them but hunt them down with a vengeance unlike anything they had faced before. The Boogeyman was awake. The Boogeyman had always been a shadow in the margins of humanity's darkest stories, a figure whispered about in conspiracy theories and classified files. For most, the idea of such a person existing was both horrifying and absurd. But for those in the know, the few who had authorized and maintained Project Boogeyman, it was a calculated necessity. Humanity needed a deterrent, someone who could counter threats no traditional military could handle. The Boogeyman wasn't a soldier or a spy, they were something far more dangerous. When the Wrenchkai began their assault on Earth, they operated under the assumption that humanity would react predictably, panic, disorganize, and crumble under the weight of fear. But the Boogeyman didn't panic. They didn't need orders or lengthy briefings. They understood their mission implicitly: dismantle the threat, no matter the cost. With the activation signal received, they emerged from obscurity and began to act. The first move was to establish control over the situation. The Boogeyman targeted one of the Wrenchkai's known operations, a facility where human leaders had been abducted for interrogation. Instead of rushing in with overwhelming force, they observed, piecing together the alien assassin's methods and patterns. Using stolen Imperial tech that humanity had barely begun to understand, the Boogeyman intercepted communications and mapped out the Wrenchkai's network. When they struck, it was swift and brutal. The facility, thought to be impenetrable, became a graveyard. The Wrenchkai, so used to being the predators, were caught off guard. Security footage later recovered from the site showed a methodical dismantling of the assassins. Their bodies were left in positions that seemed deliberate, almost as if the Boogeyman was sending a message. Survivors described a presence that was more ghost than human, a relentless force that seemed to know their every move before they made it. The Empire, upon receiving reports of this anomaly, initially dismissed it as human propaganda, a desperate attempt to save face. The Wrenchkai had faced resistance before, after all. But as more operatives failed to report back and their operations began unraveling, the Empire grew concerned. Who or what could challenge the finest assassins in the galaxy? For the Wrenchkai, the Boogeyman was an anomaly they couldn't comprehend. They prided themselves on their adaptability and superior technology, but no amount of shape-shifting or psionic manipulation seemed to work against this enemy. One assassin described the Boogeyman as inhuman, noting how they anticipated every tactic and exploited every weakness. What terrified them most wasn't the Boogeyman's skill, it was the sheer ruthlessness of their methods. The assassins, trained to instill fear, found themselves trapped in a nightmare they couldn't escape. Meanwhile, the Boogeyman's actions began to ripple across humanity. Word of their victories spread through underground channels, sparking rumors and speculation. For civilians, it was a beacon of hope. For military officials, it was a reminder of the fine line between salvation and destruction. The Boogeyman didn't operate within the confines of traditional warfare. Their tactics were unconventional, often bordering on the extreme. Collateral damage was not a consideration, the mission came first. The Boogeyman's approach wasn't just physical, it was psychological. They understood that fear was the Wrenchkai's primary weapon and turned it against them. In one instance, the Boogeyman lured a group of assassins into a trap by spreading false intelligence through hacked Imperial channels. The trap was meticulously crafted to amplify the Wrenchkai's paranoia. What began as a simple reconnaissance mission ended with the assassins isolated, disoriented, and eliminated one by one. What the Boogeyman lacked in resources, they made up for in creativity. While the Wrenchkai relied on their advanced technology, the Boogeyman used the chaos of Earth's fractured infrastructure to their advantage. Blackouts, urban decay, and human unpredictability became tools in their arsenal. The Ren'Kai, accustomed to precise and controlled environments, struggled to adapt to the Boogeyman's chaotic tactics. In one particularly chilling encounter, the Boogeyman left a message for the surviving Ren'Kai, written in their native language. "You are not the hunters. You are the hunted." The psychological toll was immediate. The assassins, once confident in their superiority, began second-guessing every move. Their cohesion as a unit fractured, each one consumed by the possibility that they could be next. The Boogeyman's effectiveness wasn't purely due to their skills, it was also the result of years of preparation. Project Boogeyman wasn't just about creating a warrior, it was about creating a mindset. They had been trained to think like their enemies, to understand their strengths and weaknesses. This training, combined with their personal vendetta against the Empire, made the Boogeyman a force unlike anything humanity had ever seen. Even as the Ren'Kai adjusted their strategies, it became clear that they were outmatched. Attempts to corner or ambush the Boogeyman failed spectacularly. In one case, a team of assassins set a trap, only to find themselves ensnared in a counter-trap that exploited their assumptions. The Boogeyman didn't just survive the encounter, they dismantled the Ren'Kai's plans so thoroughly that the assassins abandoned the mission entirely. The Empire, realizing that they were losing control of the situation, began pouring more resources into understanding this new threat. Analysts pored over intercepted transmissions and survivor accounts, but the information was sparse. The Boogeyman didn't leave a trail. They didn't make mistakes. For every clue the Empire uncovered, the Boogeyman had already moved on, striking elsewhere. Back on Earth, the Boogeyman remained a divisive figure. To some, they were a hero, a symbol of humanity's refusal to bow. To others, they were a necessary evil, a reminder of what humanity was willing to do to survive. For the Boogeyman, the opinions of others didn't matter. They weren't fighting for recognition or approval. They were fighting to ensure that humanity had a future, no matter the cost. The Ren'Kai had underestimated humanity's capacity for resilience and ingenuity. But more importantly, they had underestimated the Boogeyman. As their numbers dwindled and their fear grew, the assassins began to realize that they weren't just facing an opponent, they were facing their own worst nightmare. The hunter had become the hunted, and the Boogeyman was just getting started. The Ren'Kai were no strangers to conflict, but they had never encountered anything like this. Each passing day deepened their unease as more of their operatives failed to report back. Their sophisticated systems, designed to anticipate and neutralize threats, were proving useless. The Boogeyman was an enigma, defying their logic and strategies. The assassins, once confident in their superiority, were now the ones looking over their shoulders. The Boogeyman wasn't just killing them, they were dismantling their operations piece by piece. Every move was calculated, every strike deliberate. The assassins operated on precision, relying on flawless execution to intimidate their targets. But the Boogeyman exploited their reliance on control, introducing chaos that shattered their discipline. What started as a tactical operation for the Ren'Kai had turned into a desperate struggle for survival. It was no accident. The Boogeyman knew fear was their greatest weapon and wielded it mercilessly. They didn't just hunt the assassins, they dismantled their confidence. The Ren'Kai's psionic abilities, which allowed them to manipulate weaker minds, were rendered ineffective. The Boogeyman's mental defenses, hardened through years of conditioning, turned their powers against them. Attempts to use psionics led to feedback loops that left the assassins disoriented and vulnerable. This wasn't random chance. The Boogeyman had been prepared for an enemy like this. Years before, during one of Earth's few direct encounters with the Galactic Empire, humanity had captured fragments of Imperial technology. That technology, combined with the Boogeyman's training, had given them the tools to counter the Ren'Kai's strengths. The assassins were unprepared for an adversary who knew how to exploit their every weakness. As the Boogeyman's attacks intensified, the Ren'Kai began making mistakes. Their unity, once their greatest strength, was unraveling. Infighting broke out as paranoia spread through their ranks. The Boogeyman capitalized on this discord, setting traps that forced the assassins to turn on each other. In one encounter, a team of Renshkai fell victim to an ambush they believed was orchestrated by their own kind. The boogeyman watched from the shadows as their enemies destroyed themselves. The boogeyman's methods weren't just about physical dominance, they were psychological warfare at its finest. By broadcasting the assassins' failures to human forces, the boogeyman turned fear into inspiration. What had once been a demoralized resistance was now a force rallying behind their shadowy protector. Civilians, once too afraid to leave their homes, began supporting counteroffensives against Imperial infiltrators. The boogeyman had become a symbol, not of hope, but of defiance. But the boogeyman's tactics came at a cost. To many, their actions blurred the line between savior and monster. Reports of their operations painted a grim picture, collateral damage was high, and their disregard for conventional ethics left even their allies uneasy. For the boogeyman, these concerns were irrelevant. Their mission was survival, not morality. The cost of failure was extinction, and no price was too high to prevent that. Amid the chaos, glimpses of the boogeyman's past began to surface. Survivors of their earlier missions described a figure forged in pain and loss. One account, buried in a classified file, spoke of a colony destroyed by an Imperial raid decades ago. The lone survivor of that massacre had been taken in by a covert human agency, their rage and grief channeled into training. Over years of isolation, they had become something beyond human, a weapon designed not to protect, but to annihilate. This backstory was not known to the public, but whispers of it spread among those who worked alongside the boogeyman. It was said that they didn't fight for humanity as a whole but for revenge. Whether that was true or not didn't matter to the Renshkai. What mattered was the boogeyman's efficiency. They were relentless, calculating, and utterly devoid of mercy. One by one, the assassins fell. In one memorable strike, the boogeyman infiltrated a Renshkai command post disguised as a human refugee. Within hours, the post was nothing more than smoldering rubble. The bodies of the assassins were left displayed in a manner that sent a clear message: Earth was not an easy target. To the Renshkai, it was an act of barbarism. To humanity, it was a declaration of resilience. The boogeyman's impact extended beyond Earth. As the Renshkai continued to fail, reports of their defeats reached the Empire. High-ranking officials began questioning the effectiveness of their operatives. The Empire, accustomed to domination, had never considered the possibility of failure on such a scale. Their confidence in the Renshkai wavered, and for the first time, they began to reconsider their approach to Earth. For the assassins still alive, the boogeyman had become their singular focus. Their missions, once centered on dismantling human leadership, shifted toward eliminating this elusive threat. But every attempt to trap or ambush the boogeyman ended in disaster. The assassins, so used to being the hunters, had become prey. Even as their numbers dwindled, the Renshkai refused to retreat. Their pride, ingrained through centuries of success, drove them to continue the fight. But pride was a weakness the boogeyman exploited mercilessly. By feeding them false intelligence, the boogeyman lured them into situations where their arrogance became their undoing. Each encounter was a lesson in humility delivered with ruthless efficiency. For humanity, the tide was turning. The Renshkai, once seen as an unstoppable force, were now vulnerable. The boogeyman had proven that they could bleed, that they could be broken. This realization sparked a renewed effort among human forces. Coordinated strikes against Imperial infiltrators began to succeed, bolstered by the boogeyman's intelligence and guidance. What had started as a one-person mission was now a full-scale resistance. But even as victory seemed within reach, the boogeyman remained an enigma. They didn't seek recognition or gratitude. Their actions were calculated, devoid of sentimentality. For them, the mission was all that mattered. As the Renshkai continued to fall, the boogeyman's focus never wavered. They were hunting not just assassins, but the fear that had paralyzed humanity. The Renshkai's defeat wasn't just a tactical victory, it was a psychological turning point. Humanity, once on the brink of collapse, had found its strength. The boogeyman's actions had exposed the Empire's vulnerability, showing that even the most advanced forces could be overcome. The assassins, so confident in their superiority, had underestimated the resilience and ingenuity of their prey. For the Empire, this was more than a failure. It was a humiliation. Their finest operatives had been bested, their tactics rendered ineffective. And at the center of it all was a single human who refused to play by their rules. The Boogeyman had turned their greatest weapon against them, and the message was clear: Earth would not fall quietly. The Empire's patience was wearing thin. Reports from the Wrench Kai painted a grim picture. Earth, which should have been an easy conquest, had become a quagmire of failure. Their finest assassins were being outmaneuvered and eliminated by a single human operative. For an empire that thrived on domination, this was an unacceptable humiliation. The decision was made: if the Wrench Kai could not secure Earth, the full might of the Empire's military would. A massive fleet mobilized, dwarfing anything humanity could muster. The Armada's arrival was heralded by the sight of dozens of warships breaching Earth's orbit. Cities braced for the inevitable assault, knowing their defenses were grossly inadequate. The Wrench Kai, reduced to a fraction of their original numbers, were ordered to regroup and support the Empire's forces. The Boogeyman, however, was already moving. In the chaos of the fleet's arrival, the Boogeyman infiltrated one of the smaller ships on the edge of the formation. Using the Empire's own arrogance against them, they exploited a vulnerability in the ship's security protocols, a flaw so minor the Empire hadn't even considered it a risk. It was a tactic emblematic of the Boogeyman's approach: precise, calculated, and devastating. The ship was destroyed from within, its debris scattering across Earth's atmosphere. It was a small victory in the face of overwhelming odds, but its impact was psychological. The Empire had expected fear and submission. Instead, they were met with resistance, however futile it seemed. For the Boogeyman, every small wind chipped away at the Empire's veneer of invincibility. The fleet began its assault on Earth, targeting major cities and military installations. Humanity fought back with everything it had, but the disparity in firepower was staggering. Yet, amidst the chaos, the Boogeyman was not idle. They had set their sights on the fleet's command ship, a massive vessel at the center of the formation, controlling the coordination of the entire assault. Destroying it would throw the Empire's forces into disarray, buying humanity precious time. Getting to the command ship was no small feat. The Boogeyman had to navigate a gauntlet of defenses, slipping through layers of patrols and automated systems. Once aboard, they moved with surgical precision, neutralizing key systems and setting traps to delay reinforcements. The Empire's soldiers, trained to deal with organized opposition, found themselves outmatched by a single adversary who fought with unpredictability and unrelenting resolve. Meanwhile, the remnants of the Wrench Kai were tasked with finding and eliminating the Boogeyman before they could cause more damage. For them, this was not just a mission but a matter of pride. The idea of being bested by a human was unthinkable. Yet, their attempts to corner the Boogeyman failed at every turn. Each encounter ended in disaster, with the assassins outmaneuvered and outmatched. Inside the command ship, the Boogeyman worked methodically, planting explosives and sabotaging critical systems. The goal was not just to cripple the ship but to send a message. The Boogeyman's actions were not those of a desperate individual. They were the actions of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Each move was a reminder to the Empire that humanity would not go quietly. The climax came when the Boogeyman confronted the Wrench Kai leader aboard the command ship. This was no ordinary assassin but the architect of the Wrench Kai's operations on Earth. The confrontation was brutal, a clash of skill and determination. The leader, confident in their superiority, taunted the Boogeyman, dismissing them as a primitive creature driven by base instincts. But the Boogeyman's response was chilling in its simplicity. "You've made a mistake," they said, their voice steady and unyielding. "You thought you could break us. But you didn't realize, we don't stop. We don't forget. And we don't forgive." The battle ended with the Wrench Kai leader defeated, their body left as a grim symbol of the Boogeyman's resolve. With the command ship's systems sabotaged and its leadership eliminated, the Boogeyman set the final stage. The explosives detonated, engulfing the ship in flames. The shockwave rippled through the fleet, leaving the Empire's forces in disarray. As the command ship fell, the Boogeyman transmitted a message to the remaining Imperial forces. It was simple and direct, yet it carried the weight of humanity's defiance. Leave. Earth is not yours to take. The fleet, now leaderless and disorganized, hesitated. Humanity, seizing the moment, launched a coordinated counteroffensive. It was not a decisive victory, but it was enough to force the Empire's retreat. The war was far from over, but Earth had won a reprieve. For the Boogeyman, the mission was complete, but their work was far from finished. They disappeared once again, fading into the shadows from which they had emerged. Humanity, though battered and bloodied, stood united in a way it never had before. The Boogeyman's actions had shown that even in the face of overwhelming odds, resistance was possible. The Empire, reeling from its failure, began to reassess its approach. Earth, once seen as a minor obstacle, had become a symbol of defiance. And at the center of it all was the Boogeyman, a figure that would haunt the Empire's nightmares for years to come. For humanity, the message was clear. They were not alone, and they were not defenseless. The Boogeyman was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there was always a way to fight back. And for the Empire, the message was even simpler: Earth was not prey.